begin? Usually I like come out, like walk out and walk back in like a conductor on stage.
That would be perfect.
Like the door keeps opening and closing. Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for attending. It's a pleasure to do a lecture for you. Obviously, Ben is a very tough act to follow. I have neither the chess acumen nor the stories, nor the wisdom acquired over the years, even though I've had more years in the chess world than it may seem, but I will do my best. I was pretty excited about the topic that sort of Dina proposed. She did not, in fact, script the lecture for me, I promise, even though that would have been nice. But my instructions were very broadly sort of to talk about the Russian school of chess, what it is, what it has taught me, what my chess upbringing has contributed to my knowledge of the game today, and what I can pass on to the next generation of chess players. Of course, you guys all represent the young, up-and-coming generation of chess players who will soon be, tearing apart all the super tournaments. Yep. In fact, I'm surprised some of you didn't get invited to Tana Steel, which is starting tomorrow. Which actually does feature a really interesting clash of generations. Fabiano, who is I think 31, is the second. I just listened to the C-Squared podcast on the way here and found out that he was the second oldest player in the field of Tana Steel, and he's like 31. I was the second oldest player in Puzzle Battle, and I'm 29. So it's getting younger and younger, but I think the older generation can compensate what we lack in sort of tactical sharpness with the wisdom of chess. When I was growing up, and I feel like that can refer to, I don't know, when I was 6 and I was 16 or 66, but for most of my chess upbringing, I had sort of Russian-speaking chess coaches from the former Soviet Union. And obviously there is kind of a stereotype that exists when you think of a traditional Russian coach, like a Russian Grandmaster. Like very stern, doesn't praise his students a lot, maybe kicks his students out of a lesson if they get a puzzle wrong, does not compliment even the best tournament performance. So you have all these thoughts in your mind. And the first thing I'll tell you is that all of these thoughts are absolutely true. And I can confirm every stereotype that you might hold about your image of a Soviet chess coach, which my parents, of course, also fit.
I mean, you guys don't have to look far for the example, right? You all know my style, right?
As a representative sample, when I became a Grandmaster, my coach for about 5 years, from the time that I was an IM to the time that I was a GM, was a GM by the name of Lev Sagas. And he looks exactly like we would suspect, like mustache, very bearded, like very intimidating opponent. In the 70s and 80s, he was, I think he was once Soviet champion, which is saying a lot because he had to beat some guy named Garry Kasparov on his way there. So he helped me become a Grandmaster. And when I finally got my last norm, I made a draw on demand. I crossed 2,500 feet in, so I'm elated. And I had to bring my laptop to the town center, because this was a village in Spain, to get internet access. And I did all of that just to text my coach, I'm a Grandmaster, like exclam, exclam, exclam on Skype. And he just responds, okay, and logs out. When I came home from that tournament, he said the greatest piece of praise he's ever spoken to me, which is congratulations on a decent result. So those were the words that I aspired to. And if he would grade my game on a scale from 1 to 5, 5 was basically you were disqualified from the tournament for cheating using Stockfish. And then again, if I showed him a game between 2 computers, they'd probably get like a 4+. The Russian chess school, the Soviet chess upbringing, first of all, doesn't refer to a building. People sometimes think of it as some institution in Moscow or some former Soviet city center where all of the juniors come to receive instruction. In fact, no such building exists. I've been to several chess clubs in the former Soviet Union, and all of them are falling apart. They look nothing like the grand building that you would imagine a Soviet chess club to be like. So the Russian chess school does not refer to a specific building or a specific playing style. When you think of former Soviet world champions, how many can you name? Let's see if we can name, well, basically all of them were former Soviet world champions. So if you name a world champion, chances are they'll be Soviet. Okay, just forget about Capablanca and Steinitz and this guy whose initials are MC. How many can we name? Can we name 3 from the, let's say, early 20th century, early to mid? Spassky, Karpov, Kasparov. So already then I would add Mikhail Tal, the Magician of Riga. So if you think of their playing styles, they could not be more opposite to each other. Karpov is often known as the sort of founder of, like Magnus Carlsen followed in Karpov's footsteps. Garry Kasparov, one could say, followed more in Mikhail Tal's footsteps, much more of a tactical, dynamic player, much more emphasis on opening preparation. All of the former Soviet world champions had diametrically opposed styles and also diametrically opposed approaches to chess. So the reason I wanted to talk about this is to dispel that particular stereotype. So the stereotype about Soviet coaches is true. The stereotype about the Russian chess school being like a big building where everybody comes to receive instruction, or for there to be one Soviet style, that is false. In my opinion, the Soviet chess approach can be distilled down to a couple of properties. These properties are instilled in students by coaches, grandmasters that follow the sort of Soviet tradition, and were possessed by the vast majority of world champions and players who excelled, given this upbringing. Here are these four qualities. One is work ethic, the second is ambition, the third is the acquisition of chess culture, and the fourth is impossibly high standards, which can, these stories that I told at first can be filed under. I want to give you examples of these last two traits, and I want to focus this lecture, because I have almost no time, on these last two traits and how promoting these traits throughout my chess upbringing has contributed very directly to a modestly successful chess career. Of course, I can't aspire to the heights that like Mr. Feingold has achieved, or most of you have achieved. I never competed for the world championship, but I think I did well, and I think that this is in large part owed to some of these traits that were promoted in me from my very first days playing chess by my coaches. First of all, on the acquisition of chess culture. What is chess culture? What does that mean? And how does that help you train and improve day to day? So we're going to start with a little story. This story concerns a game that I played in 2006, and it's a game that I was really proud of at the time. And I want to kind of give you the story behind the game and behind the move that I consider to be essentially the game-winning move, which I was able to find. And the story starts with another game. This is a completely random game showed to me by my coach. Most of you have probably seen it. It comes from like the 1981 World Youth Under-18 Championship. I don't think anybody has seen it. I would be very surprised if you have. But it's a pretty instructive game, and it features a really, really interesting sequence of moves. And we're going to start from this position, where the player playing white is, by the way, still alive. I don't know about Gonzales. Couldn't track him down. But Van der Steren later became a Grandmaster from the Netherlands. He was not a Grandmaster, as we'll probably be able to tell from the quality of this stretch in a bit when this game was played. So we start with a very natural move that black played in this position, which was knight to c4. And knight to c4 gets the knight to a really active square. It's protected by the d-pawn, and it hits the bishop on e3. Black is actually much better in this position. So it's a pretty unbalanced position. There's a lot going on. What contributes to black's advantage here? Why is black clearly better here? What comes to mind?
Pawn structure and two knights in the center.
So two knights in the center. Pawn structure, both things are true. And by pawn structure, I mean the main thing that jumps out are white's very weak pawns. They're too far advanced. They cannot be protected by other pawns. The knights are both unprotected squares. And most importantly, even though there is an x-ray against black's queen, the knight on c4 is untouchable. Because if you take, black takes back. White does save black's queen, but when the points are tallied and the votes are counted, black is up in exchange. So those are the main reasons that black is much better. White ends up turning this game around in just a couple of moves and winning very, very quickly. First thing Van der Steren does is drop back his bishop to c1. Let me just see the moves. So he drops his bishop back to c1. Black plays the most natural move in the position, which turns out to be a very grave error. What does black play?
Take the pawn.
Black takes the pawn on c5. And now the fun begins. Suddenly, white whips up a massive attack against black's king. In fact, you might be surprised to know that the game ends in something like 8 moves from now in checkmate. You're like, white doesn't have a single piece that has crossed the Rubicon from all of white's pieces are either in the center or on the queen side, and yet the game ends in a series of natural moves that result in checkmate. It all starts with this very important idea that white puts into effect in this position. What is white doing? Any ideas?
94.
94. What's the idea?
We're going to f6
and you're exploiting the x-ray against black's queen. So you exploit that x-ray not in order to take the knight on c4, but in order to get this knight over to f6. And what should kind of give rise to this idea in your brain is the fact that, first of all, black is missing a fianchettoed bishop. And I always emphasize this in my speedruns. I know some of you watch, and when I commentate, it's like the absence of a fianchettoed bishop is a huge deal, because this creates a static set of weaknesses. And in chess, you can sort of categorize weaknesses as static or dynamic. Static just means permanent, like it's likely to be a factor for the immediate future, whereas dynamic weaknesses is something like a development advantage, where if your opponent castles, the advantage immediately evaporates. So you want to be very careful about exposing your position to too many of these static weaknesses, and this is what white exploits by getting the knight over to f6, which is a commanding attacking position, but it's still unclear how that translates to checkmate in just a couple moves. So black has to move the rook. The best move in the position for black was very unexpected. I would say this is a really hard move to make yourself play. And I'll give you guys a chance to take a stab at it. The way I'm setting this up should be a bit of a hint. How can black avoid the most catastrophic outcome in this position?
f6.
So that would be still a pretty catastrophic outcome, because then you would lose a full rook. This is something that none of us like to do, but sometimes we have to do it because you're not actually giving up as much material as you might think you are by doing this.
Pawn takes e4.
Pawn takes e4. The best move, which kept the game actually relatively equal, is pawn takes knight. So you give up the queen, what do you get in return? You get a rook and a piece. You also get a pawn from a previous marriage. And the pawn on e4 is untouchable. So white here does not quite have the firepower to exploit these dark square weaknesses. Black's pieces are very active. The position remains highly double-edged. White is just a little bit better. But of course, that did not enter black's mind. The rook is hanging, so black decided to move it. Black moved it back to c6. White got the knight around to f6 with a check. The knight is anchored very nicely by the pawn, so this is an attacking outpost. There's a very clean way to do it. It's a very clean move. That's more in the dirty sets, what I would play in a bullet game probably. But then I take your bishop with check. So the question on your mind should be, okay, what are black's immediate threats? Well, black has two of them. Rook takes c1 and queen takes f6. So the first order of business is to ask yourself, can I defend against both threats at the same time? Can I avoid the need to be creative? Bingo. So as I often like to say, once you ask the right question, oftentimes the move becomes very easy. Bishop to g5. So white plays the move rook b to h3. And in this position, black makes a very fancy move that turns out to be the decisive blunder. So black is winning with only one move. I would say it's not such an easy move to find, and it's not the kind of move that you'll find in like a puzzle rush, and yet finding moves like these in actual chess is really, really important. It's a very calm reaction to what's going on. And it exploits black's biggest asset. Like, what is white's biggest liability and black's biggest tactical asset?
Queen c8.
Knight to d7 was played in the game, unpinning the knight with tempo. So what is black's idea? In fact, the point is white can't even take the queen. Not because it leads to a queen trade, but because it leads to tears and catastrophe. Due to what? Rook c1 is still made. The queens don't actually matter here. What did black miss in this game?
Take h7.
Nope. Even better than rook h7. Rook h7 loses to a really cool idea, which we'll talk about.
Queen.
Yeah,
h8.
queen h8. Final move of the game. Queen g7 also works. White plays queen h8 and black immediately resigned. This is a decoy sacrifice. The point is you take on h7 as check, you deliver another check. And this is a pattern that most of you should have seen before. Usually there's like a pawn on g5 or a pawn on e5, but a bishop, to my knowledge, moves the same way and then some. So it's an interesting game, right? And I still have a database on my computer from I basically have kept all of the games that my coach showed to me. So my lessons in the early 2000s were over an actual phone, believe it or not. This was even before Skype, which is essentially woolly mammoths were walking the streets. Then my lessons transitioned to Skype, and we would use the Internet Chess Club. Maybe some of you played on the Internet Chess Club. It recently got a reboot. I don't think that's going to last very long. The evil forces of chess.com will conspire to squash all opposition, I'm sure. Yeah.
When you said evil forces of chess.com, I had to raise my hand.
So Glenn wasn't Vladimir. Yes, Vladimir.
No, that's okay. I wanted to let you know, if you didn't, that The longest game I ever played time-wise, in number of hours, was against Levsakis.
Oh, my
And
God.
I get your coach, and it was adjourned twice.
Is it in the database?
Yeah.
I can.
Yeah, it's like, I think it's like 93 moves, but it was 9.5 hours.
2 adjournments.
That's about 3 hours longer than my last.
Yeah, I lost a drawn in-game, like pretty drawn.
What's your longest, Danya?
My longest game is 150 moves. I had to defend Rook and Knight, Rook versus Rook and Knight, and then against Bushanji in Vegas in 2014. Maybe some of you remember the Millionaire Chess Tournament in Vegas, if you were following chess at the time. It's pretty boring at the time. There was no blitz and bullet. I had also like Rook and Bishop versus Rook, except I was the side of the Rook and Bishop, and I couldn't win. So plain gold.
My longest game ever is also Rook and Knight versus Rook 150.
There it is.
But how long was that one, Danya?
Or Amsterdam, 1989.
Like,
Oh, like 6.5, 7 hours.
Yeah, you'll laugh at how I lost the drawn in-game.
My coach, Alexander Kalinin, who was my coach before Lepsidis, another like Russian GM that you don't need to know anything about, showed me this game. Then I played the following game against a guy named Sam Shankland. Now, you might think that the ratings here are a mistake. 1985 for me, you might think that's like a birth year, but that's not a rating. Sam Shankland is 2101, except this game was played in 2006. So I was rated 1980. Sam was already kind of a prodigy, you know, by the standards of the time. Later, he became a very successful GM. He's still a professional player and even became US champion. And we reached this position in the penultimate round of the tournament. Sam plays the move e6. And in this position, I start thinking, it's a completely unremarkable situation. There's not much going on. It came from an accelerated dragon. So maybe you're thinking already of one similarity between the game I just showed you in this position. But suddenly, a light bulb flashed in my mind. And I came up with a move that I'm really proud of to this day. It's not even, okay, it's one of the computer's top choices. The point is not that it's some like computer move. The point is that I was able to apply knowledge very directly. And because I had, you know, neither a lot of knowledge at the time, and still don't, nor am able to apply it very directly, this is kind of a rare occasion. So it's white to play. All I'm going to tell you is that there's a very direct connection between the game I just showed you, between the future Dutch Grandmaster, and this game, and the move I'm about to make. Well, I made it in 2006, but I'm about to make it again here. Let's see if anybody can find it and explain the idea. Knight c5 back to e4. Okay, why?
If pawn takes, it hangs his knight, so you lose him in exchange there and you damage the structure. Otherwise, you can try and jump into f6, similar to what you were.
Excellent. So the correct move is knight to e4. And the point is, as you very correctly explained, if black takes the knight, it's not just, oh, it's a trade of knights, it's an equal exchange. You always have to assess the pawn structure after any pieces are traded, which is often not that hard to do. Black now gets a pawn target on e4. All of black's pawns are isolated. There's like, you know, there's so many pawn islands, black's queen's head looks like Micronesia. So knight to e4 is played. Sam was really surprised about this move. Hopefully you can kind of see the similarity between knight e4 here and knight e4 there. Not only is it the same move, it's exactly the same idea, with a slight difference that black still has a Fianchetto bishop on g7. However, after knight e4, here's what happens. Sam didn't really know what to do. He played h6. Now for full effect, I was like, I don't even need to move my knight yet. I'm going to sit on this position and enjoy the moment for a bit longer so that, you know, I make sure my coach sees that I played this move. So I played the move h4, starting the kingside attack. The point is nothing has changed. I'm attacking, he still is unlikely to take on e4. He plays queen d8. Now I shatter his kingside structure by pushing my pawn up to h5. One of the most commonly violated rules, I actually really dislike this rule, is the dogma about not pushing pawns in front of your own king. Now, I'm not telling you in your next tournament game to castle kingside to play like g4, g5 deliberately, but oftentimes moving your h pawn or moving your f pawn does not immediately, you know, ruin the protection around your king. All you really need is a g pawn. Black doesn't have the capacity to turn this back around on white, even though he would try it. So after h5, black plays g takes h5. And now it's time for what move? And why is the time for this move now and not any time later? Knight f6. Why not queen takes h5? Very common type of blunder.
So I mean, both with dropping.
Yeah, the knight is still hanging. That's never changed. So you need to actually keep the like other part of the mechanism. So knight f6 check. It's like, you know, why is my computer not charging? And like one side of it isn't plugged in to the other. So knight f6 check. Time for this move. Now that I've shattered his king side, it presents a much softer target for an attack. Bishop takes f6. There's the absence of that fianchettoed bishop that I talked about. Now it's been replaced. The knight has been replaced with an even nastier pawn on f6, and the attack essentially plays itself. So Sam tries to duck out of the way with king h7, but already the situation has become pretty dire. Queen takes h5. Now there's no longer a knight to babysit on e4. The queen can join the attack directly. Queen to e8 was played in the game. And what other idea can I now directly apply from the Van der Steren game? Rook lift. You know, what would a true pure kingside attack be without a rook lift? Time for a rook lift, rook f3. Sam does not go gentle into that good knight. He goes rook g8. He's like, I'm not just going to let you check maybe and brag about this for the rest of your life and show this game in a lecture 20 years later. So he plays for g6. And with that next move, I'm like, oh yes, you will. So now the decisive idea. And, you know, I mentioned my most hated chess rule for a reason. What is that reason? What did I do here? It's a small hint to what I do next. G4. You need all hands on deck because I only have one minor piece left. The bishop on d4 has a very clear role. It's protecting the pawn on f6. The pawn on f6 offers mating potential. So I have a rook on a1 that's not participating, and the g-pawn can very directly join the attack. Now it's really important to establish that if black plays a move like queen to g8, white is able to play g5 and black can't take with either the rook or the pawn. The pawn because it's illegal, and the rook because it is essentially illegal. It blunders the rook. What is white threatening in this position? Is white threatening anything?
Sacking the queen.
Yeah, and delivering checkmate. Queen takes h6 is made. So in the game, Sam played knight d6, or sorry, he did play queen, or sorry, queen g8 was played. I did not play g5. Why did I not play g5? Maybe I was worried, okay, I was worried that he would move his queen again to the side, and now I would not be able to play the move f5 later in the game to chase the rook away from g6. Instead, I made actually a pretty nice move, king f2. I think I prefer my 1900 self over my like 2600 self. I played king f2. They should have checked me for like devices. It was 1 year before the iPhone came out though. So king f2 was played. There's two ideas to this move. The first is it takes the sting out of rook takes g4. Maybe some of you have heard me talk about two types of prophylaxis. Prophylaxis being like the art of stopping your opponent's threats. Does anybody know, not that I'm suggesting my like speedrun instruction is some sort of like canon that everybody has to memorize, but does anybody know like the two types of prophylaxis that I've talked about? So a quick recap, because everybody knows, but you want to give your neighbor a chance to answer. Type 1 prophylaxis is directly stopping a threat. So let's say black's threat here is to take the pawn on g4 with check. An example of direct prophylaxis would be g5. It physically prevents the threat. The second type, and this is what a lot of people struggle with, is a move that essentially takes the sting out of your opponent's idea. So it's not that king f2 prevents rook takes g4, even though I might phrase it that way. So you're not physically preventing the move, but you're making the move bad for like one of a million different reasons. Okay, so this second type of prophylaxis is what top players do really often and habitually that makes their play really, really deep. They don't always autopilot their response to threats. Like, okay, pawn is attacked, I have to defend the pawn. Like, my opponent's threatening checkmate, so I have to defend the square. But oftentimes, these multi-purpose moves are what constitutes depth in your approach to chess, because there's also a second idea to this move, which is to do what? Yeah, even my charger liked that answer. Rook a to h1. And what is the point of rook a to h1? How is the rook participating in the attack?
You then can sack the queen on h6.
You can then sack the queen on h6, renewing the threat of checkmate. So Sam plays knight d6. I triple on h1. Who doesn't like to triple their heavy pieces? At least once in your life. Sam brings the queen over to f8. And finally, it's time for the final attacking move. This attacking move is, you know, removes the Jenga block that makes the structure come down for black. Which move essentially caps off the attack? F5 is exactly right. This is actually why I kept my pawn on g4, because e takes f5, g takes f5. Now the game continued. Sam actually found a way to prolong the suffering, which is a very creative defense, which is rook takes f6. But it doesn't change the nature of the position. Black is still lost. What is his idea? Is it just to give up the rook and now resign? Not quite. There is a check on e4, and then he comes back around and takes my bishop. But fortunately for me, I can still take the pawn on h6. When the smoke clears, I simply have an extra exchange, and much like Lepsakis, I was able to convert it. And I'm also threatening a check on g2 and then a check on h8, and I was able to win. Some difficulties, but mostly the conversion was smooth. So I like this example because this type of thing, where you very directly apply an idea that you learned, is, well, it sounds very rare. It's like, well, how often are you going to see a game and then it's going to feature some obscure idea and then magically you get the same kind of situation? Well, as a matter of fact, I think this happens a lot more frequently than you might realize. And this is one of the core tenets of the Soviet chess school. It's the idea that if you just expose yourself to massive amounts of ideas, particularly the more obscure, the better. We've all seen arguably the most famous and most overrated game of all time. When I say it that way, what game do you think of?
Opera game.
The opera game. So this is what like bad chess coaches do when they have a lecture to give and they don't have any material. Right? It's like, I'm going to show the opera game.
Where you showed up, I showed him the opera.
The opera game. Imagine the Duke of Brunswick just rolled over in his grave. Yeah, so how's that for a Morphe number? So when you think of like exposing yourself to famous games, and I'm not talking like undressing while seeing the opera game, but it's not the opera game and famous classical games that I'm talking about. It's the like obscure run-of-the-mill like working class ideas that taken together and seen over the course of many years is what defines chess knowledge and what allows you to spot an idea really quickly. And then you're like, how did that happen? How did my opponent find that in 5 seconds? Well, it's because of exposure. And I think this is actual pattern recognition. We can all do a million puzzles, but really exposing yourself to as many of these games as possible, game collections, ideas, positional books, that's what allows you to really grow as a chess player. And that's like the fourth and perhaps most important tenet of the Soviet chess school, that all of my coaches, even though they had very different sort of approaches on a micro level, on the macro level, all of them were proponents of this method. And I myself am a proponent of this method when I coach. So one more very quick example that made an impression on me before I talk in general terms about the last tenet and open it up for questions. There's a very famous game, and in Russian chess circles, this game is essentially like the opera game. Like if I showed this to a 4-year-old from like Vladivostok, you'd be like, oh, like my coach showed me this 6 years ago when I was in my mother's womb. In fact, my mom is a women's GM. So this game is very famous because it is a super direct illustration of a basic idea that forms a basis of positional chess, which is weak squares. So in this game, Smyslov uses like a very straightforward logic to transform the position in his favor.
Peter showed us chess.
Peter showed this. Oh, perfect. So what did White do? Quick review then.
Bishop takes c4.
I did not coordinate this with Peter.
Yeah.
Bishop takes c4. This is not the game that I will focus on, so don't worry. First, Smyslov trades the bishop pair. And then the main idea, this is a very classic idea in Sicilian structures, which is to play bishop g5. And why do you play a move like bishop g5? Remove the defender. And removing the defender, you hear that in a tactical context, but of course it also applies in a positional context. If there's a weak square that you want to occupy an outpost, you remove the defender, stick a knight on d5. There's also sort of a tactical component to this position, which is that this move seems to blunder a pawn. But in fact, White can pick up the exchange here with a nice little sequence of moves. Does anybody remember? So essentially that's right. Actually, you can even start with rook f2. The point being, you don't even give Black, a penny for his suffering, not even a pawn. So the queen has to stay on the c file to guard the c7 square. But no matter where it goes, now you're going to play rook c1. You never have to worry about bishop h4 because that can always be blocked with g3. Also, the queen is hanging. So there's that. And then White transforms the positional advantage back into a material advantage for the fork. White wins the exchange and Smyslov won the game. But now take a look at a game that, for a loss, and I don't take very kindly to losses usually, but this particular game, it made a very big impression on me because it gave, let's say, a realistic component to this stereotype of, like a GM who throws their pieces up in the sky and they just land on the right squares. There was a stretch that I played several years ago, and I was already a GM. My opponent here was Kamsky, who unfortunately in recent years in like online chess circles has acquired not the greatest reputation, as he likes to, deliver accusations without the proper supporting evidence, let's just say. And he has had certain disciples, who shall go unnamed. But he played a really brilliant game against me in, I think this was the 2017 US Championship. And the game was essentially won in the span of 6 moves, 6 or 7 moves. And it was won starting from this moment. Now, first of all, as I like to ask, are there any similarities just looking at this position and comparing it to the Smyslov game, which came from a different opening? This was a Sicilian. My game with Kamsky was e4, e5. It was a Ruy Lopez. But structurally, there's one sort of big thing in common that you should be able to notice, which is what? Which is there's a weak square at e5. However, that square is defended by like 600 different pieces. Like every one of my pieces, like you are not getting a knight to d5. No matter what, I will not be on the receiving end of like a Smyslov brilliancy. Except he gets a knight to d5, and he does it very quickly, and he does it very elegantly and really, really beautifully. So let me show you how this game proceeds. If I printed out the notation, I did. So he starts by trading on b5. Okay. Now he plays the sort of typical Smyslov idea to initiate the process, or the procedure. Yeah, I think, how can I miss a chance? Yeah. Bishop? Yeah, so not hanging the rook on e1, and also preparing in the future to exchange it at a proper moment for the knight on f6. Now my problem is that the best way to eradicate a weak square is to like put a pawn on that square, to liquidate the control that your opponent has over that square. Unfortunately, it's not easy for black to get this move to work, because this queen is very awkwardly placed, so this always runs into knight takes e5, and I was not willing to blunder a pawn to get rid of the weak square. At this point, I make a mistake, but it's a very high-level mistake, not worth talking about too much. Queen to d7. So I'm trying to fix the position of my queen so that in the future I could go d5. I'm also trying to open the diagonal for my bishop. Now Kamsky plays a really nice move, which features a theme that I like, which is moving a rook away from an open file. Maybe some of you have heard this before. This can be a hard thing to do psychologically, but not all open files are inherently important. The d5 square is important, so what did Kamsky play in this position? Which also creates a threat, which is always nice. What is the threat that rook a1 creates? Knight takes d5, so this makes me lose a tempo. So I use that tempo to play bishop to d8, or I lose that tempo to play bishop to d8, defending the pawn on e5 with the rook. Now, it's too early to play bishop takes f6 because you've done everything, but you can't go knight g3 to d5. And even if you could, that wouldn't be a very good idea because I still have these 2 minor pieces guarding the square. So now Kamsky initiates a really powerful maneuver. And with this maneuver, he starts to finalize the process. He plays the move knight to f5. Now, this is not an attacking move. It's actually a very positional move, as you will come to see. It also hits the pawn on d6. I draw my knight back to c8. Just by the way the pieces are moving, you can see who the papa is in this game. Now, after knight to c8, Kamsky plays, finally, the move, which is what? What is the move? It's finally time for this. Take the knight. But still, it's too early to try to get a knight to d5, because there's one more piece that can join in to control the d5 square. And it's a pretty simple positional move if you think in the right direction.
So the other rook on e1? Bishop b3?
Well, it would be nice if I could put it on top of this for bishop e3. So but yeah, you're right, getting the minor pieces in. And soon Kamsky will also get the queen in. So all of the pieces will have a share.
If you knew the opera game better, you would sack that rook on d1.
Yeah, and then sack his queen on e5.
And then play rook d1.
Oh yeah, rook d6, knight d6, rook d1.
Yeah.
And then bishop e7, knight e5, black resigns. Unfortunately, yeah, Kamsky had not studied his morphe too carefully. So bishop e3, I played rook a6, trying somehow to defend my weak pawns as best I can. Now another character trait possessed by most like Soviet GMs is patience, right? Even if a move like bishop d5 is good, there's no need to rush. Now the d5 square is firmly under white's control, except there is one more minor piece that has no direct impact on the game, which is unacceptable, because all pieces, or as my quote, all pieces must participate in the game. So which piece is that, which is not doing anything in particular, and how do you get it involved? And how do we get the knight involved? That's exactly right, efficiently. It's a nice little maneuver. there is a payoff in this game, I promise. There is a piece that lands on d5 eventually.
It's H2, F1.
It's H2, but rather than going to F1, there is a more efficient move you can make. I played knight e7. How else can the knight get to the promised land?
G4.
It can go to G4, which is actually a pretty typical idea in the Rudikovsky. Knight H2 to G4. And this also hits the bishop on F6, which is a nice sort of byproduct of this move. One thing that you should notice is how tactics are a support for positional chess. When you look at a positional game, you might think it's just like maneuvers and that's it. But in fact, there's a lot of calculation behind the scenes that makes the play super elegant and super objective. So here, for example, it seems like, white is one rank of pawn. But in fact, he saw that move, anticipated it, and prepared queen takes b5, which like hits all of my pieces. So this pawn is essentially untouchable. And finally, we get to sort of the payoff. I played queen c6, hoping that Kamsky hadn't studied his morphe and therefore would miss mate in 1 on g2. Not only did he not miss it, surprisingly, but he makes the move which finalizes the process started like 6 moves earlier. Even earlier than that. How do you defend against the mate positionally? Knight e3, bingo. Queen c5, and now finally, it's time. But think about how to do it in the right way. You don't want to do all of this just to give the knight up. So what piece did Kamsky put on d5? Kamsky put a bishop on d5. And in this way, he establishes complete and total dominance. Now the position looks like Smyslov Rudikovsky. Believe me, I was thinking of this game during this game, except you never want to be a Rudikovsky. You always want to be a Smyslov. Unfortunately, in this game, got a Kamsky, did Smyslov proud, and he ended up winning in very smooth fashion. After bishop to c8, he dropped his bishop back to e4, and finally he put his knight on d5, transitioned it to a kingside attack, lifted up his rook, ironically enough, and he won the game very, very nicely. I don't have time to show you the rest, but as you can see, this game made a very big impression on me because when you look at basic positional examples, right, examples of how a player controls a weak square, how a player deals with pawn structure, you might think, okay, well, I'm never going to have this exact position, so what does it matter? Like, what does it matter that Smyslov took on c4 and took on g5? And I think a key part of my chess development is the recognition that you want to tease out the sort of, it's not important that the rooks are on a8 and f8. It's not important that this came from a knight or a Sicilian. What is important is like the process itself. What is Smyslov doing at an abstract level? Like he's removing all of the defenders of a weak square. He is asserting his control bit by bit over a weak square very patiently. And the second thing is he's using tactics to help his positional play. So like in this position, he doesn't play a move like rook c1, like, oh, I need to defend this pawn. Sorry, I didn't mean to say it like that. I mean, I might make a move like this. He actually plays knight d5 directly, realizing that you should not stop thinking just because there is a pawn that's hanging. You should always be calculating and looking for tactical patterns, even if the play itself is sort of positional in nature. So this is what is referred to, I think, by chess culture. It's the acquisition of knowledge very broadly, not just in the opening that you play, not just in the games that your coach shows you, but or that you show yourself in most of our cases, but seeking out as many games as possible, seeking out as many examples as possible, and really being present when you look at a chess game played by a strong player to understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. And I think that this ties directly into the third tenet of the Soviet chess school, which is impossibly high standards, because I think my coaches believed, as I believe now, that everything in chess can be understood. The point of every move, the function of any piece, right? If you work hard on a particular game, you can understand everything that Magnus is doing or anybody is doing. And that really is a secret to chess improvement, right? You can't really understand why a basketball play is being run unless you're in the huddle looking at how the coach is drawing it up. But you can understand why a chess move is being played. And I think that's a really magical property of chess, that you can kind of pull yourself up by the bootstraps. And that is why in the old days, before like the glut of chess books and chessable courses, people just looked at games. Like that was the way you improved. You looked at the top player games and you tried to understand what they did and what you can emulate. And I think you'll find that you can emulate a lot. So that's where I'll pause for today. I think we're running out of time. I'll open it up to a couple of questions if you guys have them. If not, I'll let you go. I know it's been a long day for people. So thank you very much for listening. I'm sure this was a lot more disjointed and all over the place than Ben's lecture, but still, it was an absolute pleasure. So thank you.
What do you think is the limit on like how invested people should become in chess as a hobby?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably I'm the wrong person to ask. Like, I asked myself that 20 years ago. I mean, really, as long as it doesn't, interfere in your daily activities, although chess is a way of doing that. I mean, chess is my daily activity. Now that's how much it has interfered. It has replaced all other daily activities. But really, as long as you're into it, I think that you should. I think efficiency is very important in chess. So it's like, a lot of people think I have to dedicate like X hours a day to improvement, but really you can make progress with 30, 45 minutes a day, or maybe like an hour or two on the weekends. But really the answer is like, as long as you're engaged and interested in it, I benefit from y'all playing chess because you watch more of my streams and, you drive the mafia forward. So, the more the merrier.
Come on, guys, don't hesitate. We have a bit of time before the kids arrive, so now it's your chance.
If you would have gone to grad school in history, what would you specifically study or focus on?
Probably unemployment, and then that's what I ended up studying. Probably I would still focus on European history, particularly Eastern European history, like 19th, 20th centuries. I also, because of the structure of the major, my capstone class was on witchcraft in Europe. And my paper was on the Salem witch trials, nothing to do with my focus of my major, which was modern European history. But of course, there is a tie-in because, back then America was a colony of some other country that I won't name. So, you could argue it was part of Europe, but yeah, it's not a very popular thing to say. But I would probably focus on European history, and then I'd probably end up playing Bullet all night every night because that's the program. So that was the plan. Yeah.
So if you have, let's just say, for math's sake, 10 hours a week, and you're less than 5 years into your chess journey, how much time of that would you dedicate to studying the classes?
Probably, I would say playing, 10-minute games or 5+3 or whatever, time control you're comfortable with should be one tenet, one facet. The other should be puzzles, and then the third could be studying games. So I would say if you break it down into thirds, really the simpler you make your routine, if you have a very limited number of hours, the better. If you have 7 activities and you do this chessable course and that course, it becomes very hard to make progress on anything. So I would say something like dividing it into thirds would be kind of a simple way to, to make sure you're doing a little bit of everything. So that's kind of a rough estimate I would go by. Even gaining 100 rating points if you play in tournaments, or if chess.com is your main metric, I don't know, let's say you're 1500. I want to hit 1750. The smaller your micro goals, the better. And that also allows you to see what is holding you back. Because if your goal is, I want to become a master and I'm a beginner, there's a whole mountain standing between you and your goals. You look at a game played by 2200, you're I don't understand anything they're doing. I can never see myself playing these moves. This is overwhelming. Let's do knitting instead as a hobby. But if you compare yourself to, let's say, a player 100 points above you, if you have a friend who you're training with, that becomes a lot more realistic because you can understand they're doing some of the things that you're doing, like blundering pieces. I still do that. So you can relate to some things that they do, but you can notice more subtle differences, and that then gives you more of a roadmap. So I would say very incremental goals are not just fine, but encouraged. And soon I think you will find that those incremental goals, build on top of another. But, never say never, blah, 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 insert meaningless cliche. You can all become GMTA. Never record it, so never extreme.
No, I wanted to ask, what kind of got me into this and kind of led me here was stumbling across your speedruns. And my chess journey started about a year ago. I thought they were extremely educational. Now,
thank you.
When you start from either the bottom, the middle, or the top, other than watching your speedruns or other type of the online content, what else would you recommend for kind of starting and learning more at, I guess, the 3 levels, the lower, the middle, the top?
Yeah, so obviously, to continue the topic of the lecture, there's a couple of books, and I know Peter is not a fan of recommending chess books anymore because it is, for better or worse, sort of an outmoded way of learning, and it is hard to get yourself to sit down and read a book with like a set of wooden pieces, because a lot of coaches recommend this and then they have not read a book in like 10 years. Like, I can't even remember the last non-chess book I read, like much less a chess book. I think I'd rather write a chess book than read one. But of course that's not entirely true. I think with game collections, that is one very specific area where books are really good. So there's a book like Logical Chess Move by Move, which is a classic by Irving Chernev, written many years ago, has a lot of the classics. If you just search like Amazon, or I'm sure that there's some of these books in Chessable course form on compilations of classical games, that's just a really easy activity that you can do with a real board. If it's annotated well, this is kind of what I was talking about. You just like expose yourself to many, many ideas and your play just becomes richer because you just notice a lot of these patterns in your own games. Best game collections are also interesting, like Sparrow's best games. That might be a little too advanced, like Capablanca, some of the early world champions. They have best game collections that are really good. What else can I recommend? There's other YouTube channels, like you can graduate from the speedrun to like Levy's. I'm just kidding. I would never recommend my so I would say like John Bartholomew, many of you have heard of. He has like some really old videos that are people just don't seem to remember anymore for whatever reason, but they were sort of the inspiration behind my speedrun. These were like games he played on ICC and explained, 5-minute games. So I would say like watching, I'm sure there's a lot of these series on YouTube by GMs that I don't even know of, who do like 5-minute chess or 10-minute chess and are educational. I know the chess bras who, you know, you might think of as like, you know, doing 20 shots in a night and stuff, but Aman Hamilton has an amazing speedrun series that's kind of similar to mine. And I think that they complement each other because he, like I have an emphasis on, I want to play the best objective moves. He has an emphasis, I think, on, I want to play practically so that people at all levels can understand what I do. I think watching both simultaneously can give you kind of an interesting symphony of ideas. So I would definitely recommend his speedrun, like wholeheartedly. He also has good opening recommendations, other than the London, which, you know, we can agree to disagree on. So those are a couple ideas. And of course, like solving, like there's a lot of platforms. Chess.com, Lichess, Chess Tempo is more challenging exercises that you can do as well. And Chessable has a lot of courses that aren't just opening courses. So those are a couple directions you could look in.
And then the last direction, and the most important direction.
Chessable, like, how can I forget the most important?
Yeah, where you have daily and weekly study plans. You have advanced and normal for people like you who work. So go check that out. It's not overwhelming. On the opposite, it's everything you need in the shortest amount of time. Mike there with, I see he's nodding his head, but yeah, consider checking that out. But thank you.
And for the Instagram channel, Charlotte Chess Center, and all of the programs offered by the Charlotte Chess Center. I think that St. Louis has been responsible for like a renaissance of chess in America. All the US championships have been in St. Louis since 2011. A lot of super tournaments like the Sinkfield Cup. But it's more catered to the top GMs. Like Fabiano lives in St. Louis. Dominguez, a lot of the top GMs live in the area, but Charlotte has more of a grassroots like chess movement. A lot of players getting invested in chess and interested in chess living here. And you know, the GMs living here might be more modest in terms of like ELO, but I'm still like really proud to be associated with the Chess Center. So give it like another year or two, and I don't think St. Louis will or should become an afterthought, but I would argue that, you know, it's getting replaced bit by bit.
What is sort of your best advice you have on how to analyze and go over your games? Like say you're playing like over the board or online like classical games.
I think that the chess.com like review feature is great, but you like obviously it's going to say every move is a mistake, like every single game. So it's like, well, that doesn't give me any new information. But you want to like identify the big mistakes, like 2 or 3 big moments per game. If it's an over the board game, like you can do more. If it's a blitz game, you don't have to get like super bogged down. So like changes in evaluation, you know, like if the evaluation changed from winning to losing, okay, that might be an interesting moment to pause and explore like why the mistake was made. If it was some opening inaccuracy where you went from like slightly better to a little bit less slightly better, you can essentially skip that. So it's all about forcing yourself to pare it down to like 2 or 3 deciding moments and then understanding why those decisive mistakes were made. Or, you know, if you won a game, God forbid, like giving yourself a compliment, like where was the game won? Like where were your opponent's mistakes? And if you really want to be efficient, pretending that like you are on the losing side every game, which is a very Soviet thing to do. Like if I was my opponent, how would I approach improvement in this game? It basically gives you double the fun for, you know, half the price. So I would say, yeah, reviewing with an engine is fine as long as you approach it from a human perspective of like, where were the big moments from a human perspective rather than, okay, like what is chess.com calling a mistake, which is like every other move. Yeah. All right. With that, I think we'll wrap up. Thank you so much, guys, for listening. It's been a pleasure.